territory. One of the many reasons of why we're seeing, a lot of the marginalization, social problems that we see today. So it's really important that we acknowledge that we are meeting on these lands, and Resolve, and I think the University of Manitoba has made a commitment to work with our Indigenous peoples, Indigenous communities, and Indigenous organizations. So I just wanted to make that comment and that intent. So we're hosting our event today to acknowledge and commemorate November as being Domestic Violence Awareness Month in the province of Manitoba. But it's also another important week because on Monday was the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, and today is the 4th day of the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. So it's a really cool time of year in terms of the work that we do with the violence that women experience. And I want to thank all of you for coming because I know there's been many events around the community, so we appreciate you being here. Just a couple of housekeeping items. So we have lots of food, coffee, water, juice. Please help yourself. The presentations, we have 2 presenters today. They'll each speak for about an hour. We'll have some time for some questions. You need to use the washroom. It's just outside around the corner. I'm going to send around a sign-up sheet for the Resolve newsletter and any other information about Resolve. Resolve is on social media now. We are starting a electronic newsletter. So if you want to be kept up to date about other events that we're hosting, we're passing around research, different events, so please feel free to sign up with that. What else did I want to say before I introduce the speakers? Maybe I'll say a little bit about Resolve. I know many of you here, but for those of you who don't know what Resolve is a Tri-Prairie Research Center on violence against women and family violence and gender-based violence. Our main office, or our administrative office, is here at the University of Manitoba, and I'm the director. I don't know if I said my name. I'm Kendra Nixon. Sorry. And so I am the director of Resolve. We have a number of staff. I will maybe introduce them. Of course, they're all sitting at the back. Cindy Porcher, who's our office manager. Patricia Garasoni, who is our new digital communications specialist, which we're very excited to have, that we're finally getting into the 21st century. Cheryl Freilich is a long-time research associate with Resolve, and Renee Hoffert, who is also a research associate. And we also have 2 of our research assistants, Caitlin Dyer and Jamie Fowl. I don't know if any other research assistants with Resolve are here. So Resolve is a Tri-Prairie Research Center on violence against women and family violence. We have office, like I said, here at the University of Manitoba, an office at the University of Saskatchewan, and the office at the University of Calgary in Alberta. We've actually been around for a long time, over 25 years. We are part of a national alliance of 5 research centers across Canada on violence against women. We have a sister organization, Mary Queen Ferguson, in New Brunswick, in Fredericton, Montreal, our Griffith sister, in London, Ontario, the Centre for Violence Against Women and Children, our center that covers the prairies, and the Frida Center that is in Vancouver. And all of our centers, the National Alliance, was created really from the 1989 Montreal Massacre. The federal government said we need to research issues of violence perpetrated against women. So that is our history. I won't say a whole lot more. I know you're here to hear Susan Desjardine and Patria Taylor. So with that said, I'm going to quickly introduce Susan. Susan has the best bio.
I hate those things.
She has a sense of humor. You'll learn that in a second. Okay, so Susan's talking about the restorative justice approach to intimate partner violence, the Winnipeg Police Service model. Susan is the domestic violence specialist within the Winnipeg Police Service. I'll just say a few things about Susan. Although restorative justice approaches have been a component to the Canadian justice system for 40 years, their use in the resolution of intimate partner violence matters remain contested. Her presentation will identify the collaborative agencies required for the implementation of this program, examine the inclusionary and exclusionary criteria of the program and related liability concerns for police, and review the roles and responsibilities for program delivery. You will learn how restorative justice models may serve as an alternate solution to address the harms experienced and the, I'm missing the other piece. It's cut off. Alternate solution to address the harms experienced. Okay. Susan joined the Winnipeg Police Service in 1995, and during the span of her career has worked in General Patrol, Community Policing, Victim Services, Sex Crimes and Internet Child Exploitation Unit. Susan has more information in her bio that I encourage you to read, but I'll also just say that Susan has also been a long time Resolve Steering Committee member, and we've done lots of work together. But probably the most important thing about her bio is she wears a size 10 shoe.
It's a size 41 in Europe. I really don't get the size.
So with that, I will pass it along to Susan. Thanks.
For some reason out there it makes all the Thank you. I kind of feel like I should be doing a dance up here. Makes it sound all that important. It's been a very busy month. As Kendra was saying, with it being Domestic Violence Month and the 16 Days of Activism, it's probably the busiest month of the year for my position. And to give an example of how crazy it is, I only realized about 20 minutes ago I had 2 separate earrings on that I've spent the entire day wearing at many other meetings and discussions, some with the chief, some with, I probably look like I'm losing it. But I put them on this morning to try and decide what I was going to wear, and obviously never made that decision before I left the house. Anyway, so a little bit more about what I do in my role. I do liaise with a lot of different agencies, and many of the faces here I recognize because I've either sat on a committee with you or I've met with you in regards to policies or procedures or practices in different agencies, and how we can work collaboratively with your agency with the Winnipeg Police Service. So many of you hello, or some of you I haven't seen for a while, and some of you I've seen as recently as last week because you were helping me out with the conference we were putting on. So here's the Winnipeg Police's definition of domestic violence. As you can see, it's very sort of clinical, I guess, or that's not the right word, but it sort of fits the Criminal Code of Canada. So when the police service writes what their definition is of domestic violence, it has to work closely with what the Criminal Code of Canada says. And a lot of what is in here is based off of various inquiries that have been held over the years. There was the McKay inquiry, the Lebois inquiry, McEwen and Leclerc's sister inquiry. So there's been a few of them that it's been remedied over the years. And also, I should point out too that although it doesn't naturally say that here, Winnipeg Police, I know zero tolerance is the common or popular term used when it comes to domestic violence. Winnipeg Police have never adopted that term. We use mandatory charge because we still need reasonable and probable grounds to lay the charge. So I do recognize that RCMP used that term in their agency, but it's not been adopted by us. This is one of my more popular definitions, or my favorite definition of domestic violence, because it has the 3 key elements of what I think domestic violence is, which is the power and control and fear. It's almost like a triangle. Without one of those pieces, the offender would lose some power or control or the implying fear over the victim. Please interject or ask questions as I go. I'm not one of those people that make you wait until the end, because if you do, if you're like me, you'll forget before you get to the end of the presentation. So please feel free to ask as we go. So here's a little bit of a history. Like when I was mentioned that I started in 1995. I started when I was 10. Actually, I should say I started when I was like 40, and then people would go, you look amazing for a 65-year-old. Instead, I'm thinking, you look pretty not great for a 29-year-old, but anyway. So anyway, the history is when I started back in 95, I worked in General Patrol in the North End for 5 years, and we would go into a home, and she had obvious injuries on her face or on her body, and the house was a mess and just survived from a fight, and I would, I'd walk to her and say, what happened? And she'd say, oh, he did this, he came home drunk, or he came home mad because he lost his job at work, or whatever the reasoning was, and he took it out on her. But she doesn't want him taken away in the handcuffs, she doesn't want him charged, she just wants him to go cool off at a different location. So we'd have her, we'd say, okay, do you have some frozen peas in the fridge we can put on your face, and we will just sign my notebook that you don't want charges, and we would take him somewhere else just to cool off for the night. It would be up to her as to whether or not we liked the charge. Of course, as I mentioned earlier, there was an inquiry at the end of the 90s when the two sisters were murdered in a predominantly marginalized area within Winnipeg, and there were some changes made after that, and that we as police policy had to lay charges whether or not the victim wanted us to proceed. So this is where that mandatory charge piece came in. So this is actually cut right out of our policy within our police service, that we have to, it is our choice whether or not we feel there's reasonable grounds for us to lay the charge against the offender. We were hoping to take the choice, not the choice so much as the pressure or the blame of the victim laying the charge, and then putting it on us and not on the victim. That was the hopes. So how's that working? Not great. So as you can see, for the last 18 years, we've averaged between 15 to about 18,000 calls a year for service. We've always had it sort of rolling in with that sort of number. So if you do the math, it's about 50 calls a day to the Winnipeg Police Service in regards to domestics alone. Back in the 2000s, when that mandatory charge first kicked in, we were arresting in almost 4,000 of those cases, and now we're down to about 2,000. And why is that? Like we looked at this and we were thinking, are we becoming complacent? Are we not doing what we should be doing or responding when we're making those choices as to whether or not there's mandatory charge? I don't think so, because I think there's too many guys on this job that wouldn't allow that to happen under their watch, because there's liability to them too if they don't make that choice, they make the proper choice. My thought is because we've taken, and I'm not saying this is the only factor, one of the contributing factors, I think, is that because we've taken the choice away from the victim, who research and study has shown that only about 40% of victims actually want the offender to go to court. And that's not numbers that I came up with. I was at a conference a couple years ago when researchers were showing those type of numbers, saying they just want the violence to end, not the relationship to end. So what are we doing? How are we making that work? By hauling him away, putting him in jail, and in which case he's just going to be released again. 80% of the offenders in the remand center are only in there for less than a week, and 50% of them are breaches. So it's just, the system is not working. So we had to figure out what could we do differently to try and change this behavior. Quoting Maya Angelou, when you know better, you do better, right? So education, education, education. So we had to change something. So the goals and strategies of the Winnipeg Police Service were to implement or expand the restorative justice program within our service. We had already been using the restorative justice program in regards to non-violent offenses, so theft of a bicycle or breaking into a garage and stealing some tires, or spray painting, so they've already been trying to do restorative justice, but there was always a holdback with domestics because of the liabilities, the big word liability. Every agency is afraid of that word, right? So this was part of our strategy, was to sort of expand the restorative justice program to include domestics. So back, I'm losing my spot here. I probably am going through this faster than I intended to. Real professional presenter. So, the restorative justice program means different things to different people. I went to a restorative justice conference in Halifax in the spring of 2018, and they had two main plenary presenters who were so adamant that the victim had to play part of the process for it to be considered restorative justice, quote unquote. And I think they were using, one of the, it's the next slide, I think, this one, where it says that the victim has the ability or should be part of the offender's rehabilitation, which I actually don't think that that is always necessary. I might be in a relationship with a person and he assaults me in some form or way, and I want him to get help. I don't think he needs to go to jail because we've been in a relationship for 10 years, he's never hit me before, but suddenly something's happened, he's hit me. I don't want him to go to jail, I don't want him to go to court, I just want him to get some programming and some help. I don't want to be in his life anymore, I don't want to have anything to do with him anymore, but I still want him to get help. So, is that still not restorative for him, that he gets help? I'm over it, I'm okay. There might be situations where a victim does want to play part of that restorative piece, and that's okay too. But I just don't think that it's necessarily mandatory that the victim should be part of the solution all the time, or be part of the process all the time. And she might not, or they, whoever the victim is, might not want to be part of it. And why are we then forcing her to be in front of the offender again if they don't want to be there? So that's my thought. And you might all have different opinions of that, but it's, I'm no specialist in it, but that's my thought on that. So I'm not one that reads from slides, so I'm sorry if that's, because I find that boring, as if I'm sitting where you are and watching somebody do it, so I'll just let you go through this as I get to the next one. So why are we trying to divert? We as a police service, our goal is obviously to keep offenders away from victims. And we've been losing cases in court because it's taking so long for that to be processed. So one of the last times that I presented this, and Kendra was there, I had a question from another officer that was in the audience saying, so the only reason why you're diverting is because the courts are backed up? And no, that's not why. I want the violence against women to stop. We need it to change. What we're doing now is not working. What can we do differently? And so this was one of the reasons that started that whole ball rolling, but honestly, if we can actually change some behaviors in some people, then that's less calls for service for us in those areas. 18,000 calls a year, that's crazy. So we need to sort of reduce some of that backlog for ourselves as well. And as I mentioned earlier, I think I bastardized the numbers there, but so 70% of the people in custody right now in the remand center spend less than a week in custody, and half of those are breaches. That's really, if you think of it, that's just a turnstile of people going through the system, the court system, and are they getting help within that week? No. They're getting their 3 squares a day and a bed to sleep in, and then they're back out again. And so this is a thought process in trying to help them change and do something better. Example, one of our cases that were lost, sexually assaulting a child, and he was released from, the charges were stayed because it took too long to go in front of the courts. There's a firearms charges that were dropped because of the backlog. So we partnered with outside agencies. Obviously, police can't do this ourselves, so we had to partner with outside agencies. Justice was a huge one that we had to partner with. Is anybody here from Justice? No. Oh, yes. So there's the ICAP program that the Crowns use, and they've been doing it longer than we have. So they've already had started diverting cases before we were doing it. Their criteria is a little bit differently than ours. So we had to work with Justice to decide what police criteria would be and how that would look. Victim services, we've already been working with victim services for some time. Domestic violence support services with Justice, we've been partnered with them, I think, since the early 2000s. But they follow up with all of our victims, whether it be criminal or non-criminal in nature. Sometimes that's through a letter, sometimes it's a phone call, sometimes it's a letter being sent out. They too are getting backed up, because you can imagine 18,000 files going to victim services all the time. That's a huge caseload. Some of them are carrying, I think, 350 persons caseload, which is crazy. So they want to see some of the numbers drop as well. And then, of course, we had to work with Restorative Justice Center and Probation Services, and really it's them that does the needs assessment. So once we divert a file, and I'll go into what the criteria is to divert, once we divert a file, Restorative Justice Center will work and do a needs assessment on that offender and then decide which programming they should go into. Right now, all of our domestic violence cases are being kept in-house with the Restorative Justice Center. So they're not farming them out to these other agencies, but some of our other diverted cases are for the garage break-ins and the minor thefts and shoplifting. They might go to some of the other agencies to work with the offender. But right now, Restorative Justice Center is working for domestic violence cases only from the Winnipeg Police. That might be different from the Crown's. I think the Crown's diverting, they might go to some of the other outside agencies, but so we had to engage the community. Obviously, we had to engage all the different agencies to work with the offenders in a meaningful way. This is where I think it says that it provides an opportunity for a victim and offender to be active participants if they choose to work together, but that's not a mandate. They don't have to actually work together. But I'm also a realist, so I recognize with some relationships, not all, but some relationships, even if we charge him and he's going through a court system, they might reconcile even while there is still a court order in place. So if we're working with the offender, what are we doing with the victim? Because we recognize that some relationships are just oil and vinegar. They just shouldn't meet. And one person just knows how to poke the bear of the other person. So you can put one person through all the programming in the world, but that's not going to change the behavior of the other person. So if you bring that one who's gone through the programming back into the relationship and the other one has had nothing, has learned nothing about healthy relationships, it could go right back to square one unless they're both being worked with or not treated, but that they're getting some form of education or knowledge on how to be in a healthier place. Yes?
Do you provide that?
We as a police service do not. So when we divert to restorative justice, they work with the offender on what a healthy, depending what their assessment issues are. So if there's addiction issues or there's housing issues or whatever, they work with the offender on what their issues are. RJC currently does not work with the victim. However, Domestic Violence Support Services, as I'm aware of, has just recently hired 2 new people, and they are in the process of developing a program for the victims, which is going to start early in the new year. So that is in the works. We started this in October of 2018, and that was one of my first questions, is how are we working with both parties, and is there a reconciliation process or a continued support system out there for both parties? And at that time, it was only the offender. And so they recognized that there was something missing, but baby steps, right? You're going in the right direction, so now what's the next step? So the next step was Victim Services developing this program. So they will be working with victims starting early in the new year. And that's male and female victims. Make sense? Any other questions? Here's my professional community. So eligible offenses. There's offenses that we would be willing to divert and some that are not. I'll preface this by saying that our criteria is much stricter than what Justice's criteria is. Again, that liability piece came in. So we would never divert a stranger sexual assault. We would never divert an aggravated assault or assault caused bodily harm. There's higher end, is that my phone? Oh, Okay, no, that's okay. It's usually mine that does that. I think I turned it on silent earlier today. So, yeah, so the summary conviction, well, eligible offenses are summary convictions or dual procedure. Again, these are legal terms I'm sure you're aware of. Indictable offenses are where you absolutely have to have a jury. The dual procedure, it could go by jury or it could go just by judge, and summary, it's usually just by judge. So all the minor offenses are usually just by judge. So that's the ones that could be, are eligible for diversion. I'm trying not to get too technical because it's stuff you don't actually need to know. We do not divert breaches of orders. So that's something that we would not proceed with. So if there's an order in place and that's a breach, that's not something that we can divert. I do believe the Crowns have diverted some of those, but it's not possible for us to do that. And of course, we would never divert impaired driving offenses. So this is what the Winnipeg Police criteria is for us to divert a domestic violence case specifically. There has to be no previous domestic violence offense where there was a conviction with that same victim. He cannot have had another conviction of a domestic violence offense with anybody else within 5 years. He has to accept some form of responsibility. The victim has to agree to the diversion. And then, as I mentioned earlier, there's some offenses that we would say are not eligible. So the biggest one that the biggest two are these ones. So to get an offender to accept responsibility to a police officer that's standing in front of them saying, tell me you did it, and if you did, I will send you to programming instead of taking you to jail. Believe it or not, there's people out there that don't trust police. So they're thinking, what are they trying to catch me? The restorative justice is not a popular program right now. It's still something that the public is learning about. There's still lawyers that are defense lawyers out there that are learning about it. We've had a few cases where we have called the defense lawyers saying, listen, we want to just put them by way of diversion, but we need them to accept some responsibility for what's occurred tonight. Can you talk to your client? And he's like, I don't know what you're talking about. And then weeks or sometimes even a month later, the Crown and him and the other defense lawyer have spoken, and then I get a phone call back from the defense lawyer, I didn't understand, and I think it's a great program, and yes, of course, he'll accept responsibility, but by then it's too late because we've already laid the charge. So this is a pre-charge diversion, so instead of charging the offender, we're giving them the option to go to programming, and if they don't follow that programming, then they still have to answer to the charge in court. Does that make sense? So typically when we arrest a person, they're released on a 6-week later, they're told to go to court 6 weeks from now to answer to whatever the charge has been. So instead of releasing them on that 6-week court date, we're now releasing them on a 3-month court date, which allows restorative justice 3 months to work with that offender. If at the end of that 3 months, if they haven't abided by or participated in the programming that's been assigned to them, then they still have to answer to the charge in court. And this isn't a case where they can just go through the numbers and check the boxes and, okay, I finished the program. The probation officer or the restorative justice officer that is working with the offender monitors them quite closely and recognizes that they're either actively participating in the program or they're not. And if they're not, then they're still failed and they have to answer to their charge in court. During that 3-month process, there is still protective orders are in place, the no contact order in place. They do not attend, all the typical release date or recognizant conditions. So, getting back to this, to have the offender accept responsibility is not an easy task, and because it's still not a trusted system. So what officers are actually doing at the time of the offense is just having the offender admit that they participated in what occurred that night. Like, we're not asking him to admit, did you slap her, or did you punch her, or did you push her down the stairs? None of those things we're actually asking specifics. We're just asking, did you participate in what occurred tonight that caused someone to phone police and to attend the house this evening? And if they say yes, then restorative justice officers are willing to work with that offender, and then once they get into the program and actually meet with restorative justice, they're a little bit more trusting of the system and might then admit a little bit more as to what violence occurred that night. They don't have to admit it to us. Now, you might say that's a culpatory statement, so if he admits that yes, he played a piece of that and then he fails the programming, would that then go against him in court later on? No, we wouldn't be able to submit that as evidence. So that's just to get the person into programming. On the other side, we have the victim has to agree to the diversion. This has been coming, we've had a few cases where the officers have asked at the time and she's agreed, and then it gets to victim services afterwards, and victim services meets with the victim and they say, well, I didn't really understand what they meant when they were saying that they wanted it to be diverted, and I really don't want it to be diverted, I want him to go to court. So then I've got victim services phoning back saying, well, it wasn't explained to her well enough, or I actually think kind of in the heat of the moment, there's so much going on at that time, like to have a victim say that's what they want or they don't want, they might not have a full understanding of it at the time of the offense, because it's a heated emotional time for anybody. So we still have, it's not a perfect system, we still have some work to do in that, but I would say 90% of the time it's explained to them well enough that they understand, and like 90% of me, once I get to victim services, they still want that offender to go to restorative justice. We've had some hiccups, some bumps along the road, but so far it's been going pretty smooth. So any questions on what the criteria are? Everybody understand? Yes?
For the second one, where it says the offender has no previous DV charges, what if there was 2 arrests and like the first charge was dropped and they were still kind of pending for the second one, or would they still be eligible for that, or no, because there was an arrest in general?
If the charge has been stayed, then that would not be counted as this, but if there's this charge still pending, then it would be counted and he would not be eligible.
Okay.
However, glad you asked that, because we have cases where we actually think that the offense that occurred that we're answering to that night, it fits the first 2. The offender accepts responsibility, but the victim might not be agreeable to it at the time. We can put in our report that we believe that this offense that happened that night is eligible for restorative justice. However, the victim might not be compliant with it at this time, or everybody, you know, it fits all the boxes, but maybe the offender's not really met responsibility. Or in this case, offender and victim both agree to it. He's had no previous charges with that victim, but he's got one pending charge with a different victim from 3 years ago. So we can't divert it, but we can flag it in our reports when it gets to the Crown, and the Crown can review it. They have a team called ICAP, which is the Intensive Case, I can't remember what the acronym's for, but it's a justice program where they're reviewing all the files in justice, the Crowns are reviewing them, and they're diverting them. So we flag it on our report and say, we really think this would be perfect for restorative justice, however, one of these things don't fit. Then when the Crowns get the report, they're going, yeah, I agree, I think we can divert this, and they'll divert it post-charge. So they're diverting it afterwards. The benefit, I think, of the Crowns diverting it is they actually have 6 months to work with the offender. We only have 3. We're trying to change that, because I think to change a whole lifespan of learned behavior in a 3-month period is likely not going to happen. There might be some hiccups along the way, but it's still a step in the right direction, right? We're still trying to get them into some of the processes so that when they know better, they'll do better. Any other questions?
So your first point is offender has no previous domestic violence charge involving the same victim.
Mm-hmm.
And then offender has no previous domestic violence charges in the past 5 years. Is the first one no domestic violence conviction against the same victim? Because how are those 2 points different?
They're not really, but they're just the specific, other than it's not because if it's been 5 years since he's been with anybody else or had a domestic with anybody else, but in the last year that he's been with this victim, we might have been called to the home a couple times, but there's not been enough to lay a charge. So there's been other domestics that we responded to that residence, but it's not necessarily a criminal offense has occurred until that night. And then we're now charging that offender. Does that make sense? A little bit? No, you've got to throw a rock.
So it's not a domestic violence conviction involved in something?
Yes, it is. They can.
Or charge?
Oh, okay. Then I have to change that. Yeah, it should be any no previous domestic violence conviction. Well, even charged, even if he's on charge with that same victim or going back to that victim, then he wouldn't need it because he's got previous history, right, of domestics within the last 5 years. So we wouldn't divert something if he's already got a charge waiting. So no previous conviction. No, this works. I think no previous charges with the same victim within the last year. Yeah.
It's the same victim.
It can, but if the charge is pending, then we wouldn't divert it. There's something at the back here too. Sorry, Cheryl was in the back. First one to you, Jared.
I just wondered, so you said sometimes later you'll get a call from victim services saying that, you know, they've met with her and she doesn't want it to be diverted. So in that case, do you remove it from the diversion program?
Not necessarily. So what happens in that case, and I've had 2 or 3 files like that, and in all the cases that I've received that phone call, I have met with or spoken to Senior Crown Bruce Seitha, who's in charge of the ICAP program with the Crown's office, and said, here's the case, here's what happened, here's the offense. The victim is not necessarily compliant at this time. Do you want me to pull the file, or would it be something if I pulled it and sent it to you, you would divert it anyway? And in every single case, he said, I would have diverted that file. So then we go back to victim services and meet with them and say, we meet with the victim and explain it to them as to why this is not going to get pulled. It was our understanding at the time that the victim was compliant with this. But at this point, they're not compliant, so however, the Crown would have still diverted it. I've not had a case yet where the Crown was saying, yeah, pull it, and we'll put it to court. So, there was, Jared, you have a question?
Thanks. You know the last one says in connection with some offensive sexual nature?
Yes.
But predominantly in the context of domestic. Is there anything, any sexual assault charges outside of domestic that would meet criteria for diversion? Like
Yes.
stalking or- Yeah.
Not stalking.
Was one.
Stalking is a scary one, and I wouldn't necessarily divert that. I'll give you an example. Like sexting is a big thing right now. Teenagers are sexting. So all the time, it seems like everybody has a nude picture on their phone. I don't get it. Not attractive. But anyway, so yeah, they would, if it's like a 16 and an 18-year-old or 16 and a 17-year-old, and they've exchanged pictures willfully, and you know, there's a breakup, as there always is, and then somebody shares the picture, and he has no previous record, no signs of any kind of violent behavior in the past, then yes, that is open for diversion. And more cases are happening like that. Also, there's cases where a sexual assault might be somebody slapping someone in the butt in a bus stop, and we catch who that person is, and one victim might be okay with that person just going to a diversion program, and the other person might be truly traumatized by that and actually want the offender to go to court. So again, it's the victim has to be agreeable to the process. So, however, like obviously a stranger sexual assault or like a violent sexual assault, we would not do that. As sexual assault, in regards to a domestic case where there's violence as a history, we would never divert or even think to ask a victim. Yeah. 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 Anybody else? Yeah.
Sorry, I'm just getting a little bit muddled.
Okay.
So-
That could just be me. That might not be you at all.
Anyway, so I just want to be clear that I'm understanding it correctly. So the victim at the
guess the short answer to that would be no. If the victim is agreeable at the time of the offense for it to be diverted and they believe that that is the best choice of action, I guess it's a case-by-case situation, right? There's no cookie-cutter world out there. So we would have to totally look at the case over. I will consult with victim services, I'll consult with the Crown and sort of discuss the situation and why the change in thought process for the victim. Sometimes it's retaliatory in nature, sometimes it's just, like you said, at the time it's very emotional, and then later on when she's had time to think about it or has had time to get support services to work with her, she might change her mind. However, the Crown has the final say. So if the Crown is saying to divert the matter, it's going to get diverted. I'm not saying it's a perfect system, but it's...
So from your work, and just having said that, do you see that as a potential, perhaps, pressure that the person is getting to put it to diversion? And that sometimes maybe they in a way could be getting re-victimized?
I would say, I mean, what you're saying is valid, 100% valid, but what I'm saying, my experience is that the percentage of that actually happening is really small. I haven't seen a lot of it. I have not seen any cases where we have worked with the victim and explained the process of what restorative justice is a little bit more in detail with them. And often they'll say, oh, it's different when I thought it was. You're right, this might be the best situation for this person rather than going the court process. The Crowns might sit with them and saying, in reality, the chance of conviction is quite low, but at least this way he's getting some form of treatment as opposed to just putting him in jail for a day and then he's coming out and this not ever showing up in court. So, you're right that the victim could feel re-victimized. I'm not going to minimize that. However, our experience has been, once we've been able to explain it to her and just have the discussion between the Crown and support services and the victim, we've been able to appease the concerns of the victim so far. We've not had any one case yet where the victim has been so adamant that we really had to rethink what we've been doing. So, yes. The Crown has...
gets to work 6 months with an offender
Yes.
versus 3 months.
So the difference there is we are, as police service, before it even gets to the Crown. So one of the reasons why we're doing the pre-charge diversion is we're trying to ease up some of the backloads that the courts have been getting. So we're making the decision before it even goes to the Crown that we're going to divert it to restorative justice. And we've been told or directed by justice to only release that person with a 3-month window that they can get the programming. The difference is that if we don't feel that it meets any of these requirements and we're charging the person and we're laying the charges and we're submitting them to the courts are making the decision saying, we're not going to try this one in court, we're going to divert it. And when they divert it post-charge, because the charge has already been laid, then they're given 6 months to work with the offender. So, yeah. Yeah. That's okay.
I'm wondering how do the perk or the victim's characteristics play a part, like status, race, abilities?
Makes no difference. Doesn't make the demographic of the offender and the victim makes zero difference as to whether or not we're diverting. However, it may play a part in which programming that they go to. which I think was on my previous slides. These are some of the different agencies that are working with the offenders. So in meeting with the offender and finding out what some of the concerns or issues are that brought him to the place that they are at that time, might decide which program is best suited for that offender. So they might use that demographic to choose which programming is best for that person, if that makes sense.
So if like, there was like, if a case came up where it involved somebody who would be seen as a youth, so, you know, maybe the age of consent, but the person was in a position of authority, something.
That would never been diverted.
That would get.
No.
And diverted just means that you take it, you suggest it for restorative justice rather than going to court.
Yeah, diverted means instead of laying the charge through the courts, we're actually, it's almost like putting it in a holding pattern while that individual, but there's still court order and protective conditions in place during that process, like sort of suspended until they've gone through the programming, and if they don't go through the programming, then we're still gonna lay the charge. But if they go through the programming, then the charge is never laid. But it still shows up on their record, just so you know.
And it qualifies for IPV, is that correct?
No, we've been doing it we've only been doing domestic violence or IPV for the last year. We've been doing it for other cases like theft, shoplifting, minor offenses for longer than that. Mm-hmm.
So if a victim chooses diversion, where do you take the offender? Like, they're obviously not, in that moment.
Yeah, they're still separated. So we still take the offender to whatever holding facility of whichever division that they're being arrested in for the processing. They still have to be taken in because they still have to swear to the conditions of the release that they're going to abide by those conditions. They still have to provide an address as to where they're going to stay outside of where the victim is. The victim is notified of all of that information. So, but they're still separated.
Like a no contact order?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
all those processes still.
Exactly. So we have, and all of that's going to change because there's some legislation that just changed, and I think it goes into effect December 15th or December 18th. I can't remember what it is. But we would be releasing the person on a promise to appear with an undertaking with all those protective conditions, and then after December 15th or 18th, it's now just going to be a recognizance. They're taking the promise to appear away. It's all on the same form. They used to be two separate forms, and now they're changing it. So there's going to be a bit of a process there too. But it's still the same thing. It's formatted differently. Yeah.
So through the pre-charge diversion, the 3-month programming, and it's the restorative officer who kind of decides whether or not they met the criteria of the programming. If they are moving along that journey, but they aren't quite at a place where you would like to see them in their ability to extend that. Or is it 3 times that end?
No, we've actually been able to extend it a couple times. There's been a few instances where it's come up where the restorative justice worker officer wants to continue working with them. And then there's also cases too where they finish the 3 months in time, but they still want to continue going to some of the group sessions, and they're still welcome to continue. It's not like, okay, your 3 months are done, you're out. Like, they can continue, just like Spirit of Peace, where they can continue to attend if they choose to attend. They're not mandated to, but they can if they want to. The issue comes into play with that, where we have to touch base with the victim because the protective pieces are only into place until that 3-month period. So we would, again, it's case by case, there's no cookie cutter situation. We would look at it and say, they've abided by the conditions, they're actively participating in the programming, he'll probably be done, or they'll probably be done in the next week or two. Are you comfortable with this going the way, continuing the way it is? And again, yet not yet have I had somebody say, no, I want them charged. They've all wanted the programming to continue. So,
Is there like a cultural component to that programming in that 3 months down?
I can't speak to the programming that's actually done because that's not done by the Winnipeg Police Service. However, the answer to that is yes. I can't, I mean, I don't really want to go into all the programming because I don't know the in-depth programs or how the programs work with all the agencies, because that's outside of us now, right, as a police service. But I've inquired in that before, and I've been told yes, that there is some of the cultural involvement, so. So we have had cases where we want to divert a person, but we can't find them. So we've spoken with the victim, and so the offender is not located. So we speak with the victim discloses what occurred. We think, well, this is probably eligible for domestic or for restorative justice. However, the offender has left the scene, and we haven't been able to locate the offender. So what we're doing is we are processing them, like submitting it for warrant, because there's enough to substantiate a charge. We just can't find the offender, and because it has to be pre-charged for us to divert, we have to submit it for a warrant, and as soon as you submit it for warrant, the charges have already been laid, so we can't. So this goes back to what I was saying earlier, that we would write in the report that we would divert this. However, we've been unable to locate the offender at this time, and then when the Crown receives it, they review it, and they would likely divert it. So just because we can't divert it doesn't mean that we can't suggest that that would be the right thing to do. So the offender is located, like I mentioned, we arrest the person, the court date's 2 months down the line. Typically it's only 6 weeks, but we're giving them 3 months to process the restorative justice programming. And then our files are sent every Tuesday to the Restorative Justice Center. So really at most they should only be short 1 week of the 3-month process to work with the offender while they have that. Yeah?
So I'm just going to backtrack a little. So you said if offenders are arrested on a warrant, that doesn't allow them to be diverted.
Not by us, but the Crown can still divert it.
But what if like they turn themselves in? So I know in probation.
Still, it's a warrant. The charge has already been laid. So for us to submit an offender for warrant, the charge is officially laid through the courts. So once the charge is laid, then even if they turn themselves in, that's great, and we can put in our narrative, he turned himself in, he admitted to the offense, the victim was okay with it being diverted. It goes to the Crown reviews that, go, oh, Winnipeg Police is okay with this being diverted. They'll look at the case, we think so too. It goes off to the RJC. So it's post-charge, so now the offender has the 6 months instead of the 3 months. Am I talking in Greek? Okay. So the Restorative Justice Center has been around actually for some time. Who was mentioning, you were asking if it's been done for any other offenses, and it has been. So it's been around for a while. I do have their contact information if anybody wants it. I already kind of covered some of that. So how is it working? So in the last year, we finally had 1 full year for us to work on, to review. So from October 2018 to 2019, we had 63 cases. 47 of them were male. 10 of them were female that were diverted. There was 5 male youths and 1 female youth diverted. And in total, we had 39 successfully complete the program. We still have 16 that are in progress. 3 of the offenders refused responsibility, so the charge was laid. 4 of them were incomplete, so again, the charge was laid in those as well. They participated in the program. 1 failed the program. 4 of them were incomplete, so they didn't finish the program completely within the 3-month stated, so we extended it a little bit. So it's looking pretty good so far. Of the ones that I looked at, when I actually looked up every single offender within that year of those 63 cases, there was, I think, 8 offenders where we had additional contact with them after they finished the programming, and not one of those cases were violent. All of them were, and actually most of them were victim-based. Like the victim was reaching out to the offender, and the offender didn't want anything to do with her anymore. And so the offender's calling saying, I don't want to get involved in this anymore. Or they were just in an argument and police were called before it escalated to a violent situation. So in the short term, it's looking good. And we're going to continue going with this process to hopefully change the direction of the numbers that we're seeing. We had to try and do something different, and I just think knowledge is best, and if somebody is getting the proper knowledge that they need to get the programming they need, then hopefully it'll change some behaviors. So just to give you some statistics of the Winnipeg Police in 2018, those were our number of domestic violence calls. It's our single largest call type. 55% of them are in the north end of downtown, which means it happens all across the city, doesn't matter where you are. A lot of people think it's poverty-based, and it could play a factor, but that's not the only reason. 58% of the cases, I had mentioned that we arrested about 2,000 of those cases, and 58% of those are in the north end of downtown we're actually charging, and 86% of the cases were violence from men against women. I think that number is skewed, to be honest. I think we have a lot of male victims that are not coming forward, and for many, many reasons, but I think that number is skewed, because this is only based on what I was actually phoning police, and only 12% of our cases lead to charges, which is change from what it was 18 years ago, which is why we're trying to do something differently.
So then what percentage leads to conviction?
That you'd have to talk to justice. So probably not as high as you would think. There's a lot of cases that we as police are even frustrated by, but the measure of accountability for them to proceed with cases is different than it is for ours to lay a charge. I saw some hands. Hi, Angie.
So I know that question came up before around if there's any part of the criteria around like abilities or ethnicity. Are you tracking that as far as who is going through the program? Because I'm concerned that even though there's not any restrictions or kind of targeting within the criteria for diversion, that there's an invisible bias to based on the history that we have with Canada and how domestic violence manifests within communities, that there's certain groups that are being left out of this process just by the nature of the project that we have.
We have not done a study to see how many of whichever ethnicity is going through the program. I do know Curtis is the restorative justice worker that works specifically with the Winnipeg Police files, and he and I have spoken many times. And I know many times he's brought in elders. I know many times he has brought in language band people. He's done group sessions where he's had 4 or 5 different offenders at the table that have had a translator there with them. So I know he's working with offenders from a multitude of different ethnicities and demographics. So have we actually studied or measured that? No. But I do know that he's seen a broad array of cultures and ethnicities. And I can't say, I mean, with your history and where you work, you're asking specifically, is the Indigenous community being diverted more or less because of their history? We have to use Canadian history. I apologize. Thank you for that correction. Thank you for that. Yes, so that can't play a part in what our criteria is. Either they fit the criteria or they don't, and it's the same at justice. But I don't even know what their criteria is. I know it's not as strict as ours. And I know that there are diverting cases that I would never divert. But some of it, and when I talk to Bruce, he sort of says it's just us sometimes just working with an offender and trying to build that trust to say, look, I'm willing to work with you, but you need to, step up and finish this programming, or at least do something to show that you want to change as well. I don't want to just throw you in jail. I don't want it to be just another case. So, I can't say that we're measuring that specifically is a short answer to your question.
I just wanted to speak to your comment. I'm from the Restorative Justice Center. One of the things I want to assure you of is that when we do our needs assessment, when clients come into our center, we look at all the different variables in their life. So we may need to, there may be also an addiction issue, so we can run addictions programming out of the RJC Center with them. We have a program that specifically looks at,
specifically looks at the cultural dynamics. So it could be a client who is coming from even a newcomer. So we try to, we're gonna pilot the next few weeks a Punjabi Healthy Relationships program. So we're gonna bring in some interpreters and we're gonna try and work with those clients specific because English isn't their first language. When it comes to Indigenous clients, we have several sort of benchmarks that we can ensure that if they identify as wanting cultural aspects, then we certainly can provide that to them. We have a specific program called Reclaiming Our Identity, which is a 5-day program where the clients come in and they in a program setting, and they begin to learn about the history of Canada and colonialism and the residential school system and the 60s scoop and the Child Welfare Acts and how that has affected families in this country and certainly within the province of Manitoba. We also run other programs around thinking awareness. So helping them to recognize how trauma impacts upon the brain's ability to manage and to cope sometimes in highly stressful situations. So we do quite a lot of different types of programming in addition to our IPV program, which is the Healthy Relationships program. And as Susan said, if at any time a client is asking for additional help or services, we always do our best to find an appropriate alternative for them. And even after they're done the program, if they've successfully completed our programming and they want to continue to work with us, we will absolutely continue to work. They're always welcome to come. One of the most exciting things that we've recently taken into our center is we're going to have a cultural program for our female clients to make ribbon skirts, and we can make elders available. We can help them, the goal will be to go medicine picking, smudging, attend different ceremonies. They can have one-to-one time with an elder, or if there's a group of individuals who want to meet with an elder, we make that available. We have an elder within our department that will come out and meet with the clients. So we're very inclusive. We're very aware of those dynamics that we need to be aware of. And I guess the one thing I want to say is, in our center, what we believe is that sooner is safer. I was a probation officer for 20 years. I've worked in the domestic violence area for 20 years as a PO, and I've recently gone over to the Restorative Justice Center to help with the provincial programming. And one of the things that I experienced most often as a probation officer supervising domestic violence offenders was the vast majority, as Susan said, they get back together. And if they go through the court system and the victim doesn't want to work within the system, or they don't want to come to court and be helpful, then sometimes the charges are stayed and the offender gets no intervention whatsoever. And then they're back in the same cycle yet again. So one of our important mantras is sooner is safer. And what we would find is probation
to courts through the system, it's remanded, maybe they've spent time in jail. 18 months later, they come out on a probation order. Intervention needs to happen as close to the time of the offense as opposed to the latter, right? And that's when we know it has the most impact. So that's a big piece of how we operate at the Restorative Justice Center. We want to get those interventions to those clients as quickly as possible. And those who want to work with us, we're always, we'll be there and available to them as long as they need, even after they've dealt with their charges. So hopefully that helps.
There was a question, sorry, I'll go to the back and then to you. There was someone at the back there, sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you for this work. Like, I really commend you because something different needs to be done. So it's just incredible to hear this work. So I have a question about diversion, and is there any sort of consideration if children are present when the incident occurs? And does that make it more likely to be diverted or less likely? So I'm just really curious to hear about that.
Yes. So one of the things that we've put on the frontline officers is whether or not they believe that participation in the program is going to be appropriate. So we've had cases where there's children in the home but they didn't witness the offense, they were sleeping at the time of the offense, or the offense happened in the garage and they were in the house. So we still would feel that that's eligible for diversion. Depends on the age of the child, depends on the seriousness of the offense. There's all sorts of different things that play into children being at the scene. So there's no cut and dry answer in there, which is why we gave the officers a little bit of leeway or decision making as to whether or not they're going to divert. I know my time is up. One more question, and then.
Really quick, I just wanted to know, does this practice apply liberally with our CMP?
This is a Winnipeg Police initiative. I know we were the first police service in Canada that did this with domestics. It's my understanding that the RCMP in some of the northern rural communities have started this. I can't speak for their process, so I don't know for certain. I've heard that there's been some other agencies that are starting this, but I don't know where, and so I can't speak for that. So this is my last slide, and I always end my presentations with this because this is one of my favorite sayings I've ever come across that I read it was in a leadership book actually, and it was that few people are aware that they're participating in someone else's journey, and I think everybody here, by learning and trying to know better or do better, is only going to help you affect someone else's personal journey. And to me, it really made this, it hit home when I read this, and I had to reread it about 4 or 5 times when I was reading the book, and I thought, wow, this is really, really impactful, because if you really thought about it, like every small word of encouragement or every little thing you did or said, if you recognize that it affected that person's journey, their own life path or their own life journey, would you do or say something different when you were talking to that person? If you made yourself aware of what effect you were going to have on another person. And I think all of us in this field, we are all working in this field because we care about other people and their paths. So thank you for participating in my journey, and hopefully I've participated in yours today. So thanks very much.
Anyways, thank you, Susan, so much for that. I know we could probably be here like the whole day asking you lots of other questions. There's so much detail to your program and, of course, the connection to Manitoba Justice. And just by everybody's question, it seems like obviously the work that the police service does impacts the work that everybody's doing, no matter what sector you're working in. So thank you very much.
I will be sticking around if anybody wants to talk to me after. I'll stick around at the next presentation. If you have any questions, I'll be here.
Yeah. So I just have we're going to take about a 15-minute break so you can go to the washroom, get some food. I have to apologize. I meant to say before Susan gave her presentation, we are videotaping it. Again, being part of, trying to get us into the 21st century and posting things on YouTube. A lot of people were not able to attend this event, and again, we're a Tri-Prairie Center. Folks in other parts of the prairies, folks in the north wanted to see this, so we are videotaping it and putting it on YouTube. If that is a problem for some people, for whatever concerns, can you please let me know? And again, my apologies for not mentioning that earlier. So with that, let's take a 15-minute break, and then